Hello, I'm so lucky today and honored to have this beautiful soul with me. Hi, can you please tell me a little bit about yourself and what you're doing?
Yeah, hi Asda. It's lovely to be here. So I am Nikki Penny. I'm an empowerment coach, and through my own journey of healing in the last, I would say, 15 years, I've become inspired to completely change my own life away from my previous corporate career. And that led me to change my life entirely, to move to a different country temporarily, and to ultimately set up my empowerment coaching business where I support women essentially to feel more confident in all aspects of their life. And I help them do that by them understanding a lot of the things within them that we're going to cover in our beautiful chat today.
Can you thank you so much. Can you please tell me where did you live when you were out of the country and what you did there? And did you learn something, gain something from there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from the UK originally, and that's where I am now. And we moved to France for 10 years. And honestly, it was a little bit of kind of escaping my corporate stressful life. And I'm an equestrian, so I have horses. I'm an amateur rider. And I'd always had a dream since I was a little girl of having the horses at home. And in France, there is a lot more land, and so it is cheaper to buy property with land. And so we took the horses. We had a complete lifestyle change, and honestly, while we were there, I started to heal from, in part, the stress of my old corporate life, but also from a lot of the other things from when I was much younger that we will go on to talk about. So I did a number of different things while I was there. So when I first went, I was doing so my previous career, my corporate career was in human resources, and I was still doing some of that for the first part. And then I was in a really fortunate position to take a complete break. Um, I then did a few other little bits and pieces supporting my husband, who was working for himself at the time. And then, having done a lot of kind of healing and growing, I really realized that I had the drive in me to do something. And it kind of came about almost organically. I actually was working on my own mindset. I would have called it at the time mental resilience in relation to my riding, my time with the horses, because I really realized that I was struggling with nerves, competition nerves, which I had never really had the opportunity to experience before because I'd never had the time to actually compete because of my crazy corporate life. And it was really, that was the start of my journey, that I discovered things were happening in my mind that firstly I hadn't previously been aware of, and secondly I didn't want. They were holding me back. And so I kind of went on a bit of a deep dive to help me with my horse riding, which it hugely did. And I was so blown away by how some relatively small changes could have such a big influence on how I felt and how I was able to perform in my riding. I'd always been around sort of behavioral psychology because in human resources, there's a lot of it, and it was always of huge interest to me. But at this point, I was hooked, and I went straight down the rabbit hole of, wow, if I can make this much of a change in one area of my life with reasonably small amount of effort, imagine what else could be possible. And then this kind of whole world opened up, and that's when I felt what honestly felt like a calling to start the business that I run now, which is how I'm sat in front of you today.
Thank you. So lovely. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Thank you. And so grateful to hear that little change you made that had this big impact on you. So wow, it's I'm very grateful for you telling that. And can you please tell me how do you keep your mind, your mental health in check daily?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting one because I've created, and this would probably be in about the last 6 years or so, a really good balance throughout my day. And what my focus is on is my intention to feel good. So I talk a lot with clients about, are you being intentional? Because the opposite of being intentional, and that's how I lived my life for a long time, was to be on autopilot. And when we're on autopilot, we're not doing the things that make us feel good. We're into kind of habits that we don't even realize we're into. So a big focus of my day is, am I being intentional? So I start my day with a gratitude journal. And I do that before I do anything else. It's literally pretty much the first thing that I do when I wake up. And that consists of making a note of things that I'm grateful for. And I balance that with being grateful for things that I have, the things that I am, or even things that I'm manifesting into my life. So it's like a real kind of mixture of all of those. I love to take my time, so still talking about kind of morning routine here, to have a cup of tea. While I do that, get into a real feeling of gratitude. And importantly for me, it's about allowing myself the space before I turn my phone on or get involved in anything technical. Just because of, I know how easy it is to dive straight into social media, and then your mind is going off on one before you've even really sort of set your intention for the day. So I get outside really early because I feed the horses, and then I'll go and walk the dogs. So, you know, obviously light early in the day is really good for our minds and our circadian rhythms and things. So that kind of happens by default for me with my lifestyle, but that's really good. But because obviously I am during the day sat at my desk on calls or sat with clients, I really make sure that I move my body regularly, because I just know how much my energy levels drop if I sit still for too long. And obviously if I'm creating content or whatever, everything feels a bit harder. So I move my body. And I think the sort of two final things, which are really big ones for me, what I eat is absolutely crucial. So when I mentioned my previous corporate stressful life, I really ate basically for convenience when I was hungry. And that was things like takeaways or convenience food. Whereas now I really plan my food. So this might sound a little bit crazy, but it works for me. I will often know at breakfast time what I'm having for dinner, because what I hate is to feel like I don't have something ready to eat, because I know that my mind will go, oh, you've had a really full on day. The last thing you want to do is to start cooking. So because I historically believed that I didn't have time to cook in my kind of old life, if you like, how I manage that now, because I obviously run my own business, I've got my horses at home, and life is busy as it is for so many people. I love a kitchen gadget. So slow cookers, I will put like a curry in the slow cooker and I'll make 10 meals in the, you know, it takes me 20 minutes to prepare it, and then it's cooking behind the scenes. So when I, on a morning, and I've got a system that most people find quite amusing, but it works really well for me, is when I've done the slow cooking of a curry, let's say, I will box it all up and I will put them in the freezer. All my Tupperware boxes have numbers on them. And there's a book that tells me what the number is a curry. So on a morning, I'll be saying to my husband, go get box number 10, because we're having curry for tea tonight. And so then all I have to do, it's hilarious, but it works really well. All I then have to do at dinner time, or he has to do, depending on who's doing it, is heat up some rice and heat up the curry. And we've got lovely, tasty, nutritious food. And then the other kitchen gadget that I love, particularly in the winter, is a soup maker. So I might, on a morning after I've had breakfast and walked the dog, drop a load of vegetables, put it in the soup maker, and then one of us will press go at like midday. And it just means that we are intentionally eating stuff that is good for us and makes us feel good. So, and I think probably the final one is a big emphasis on getting quality sleep. So at the moment, I've got a lot happening in my world, which is not uncommon. We're in the process of buying a new house. We're applying for planning for things for the horses, and I'm busy with work, as is often the case. And there's a lot. but I'm sleeping really well. And the me of old in my old life would wake up in the night and be stressing and worrying and having all of the overthinking. But I believe it's because the reason why that's not happening to me now, I take my time to relax in the evening. So I really recognize the value of winding down and allowing my body and mind and brain to kind of chill. So things, good hygiene, things like making sure I'm not on my phone or iPad or got a TV in front of me. I love to read. I make sure that I'm not sat in, a brightly lit room. We will sometimes have sleep tea in the run up to going to bed. And I think the biggest thing with all of these, because they're now, when I first started these kind of habits, it was a conscious thing. Now they're just how I live my life. So it's as normal to me to get something in the slow cooker or to make sure that we're having sleep tea half an hour before we go to bed. It's as much a part of my day as like having a shower or brushing my teeth. So they happen automatically now. And to be realistic for the listeners, I had to be really intentional with them in the beginning, because obviously it was my life now and my habits now are very different to how they looked, say, 10 or 12 years ago.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being so honest and tell from how it was to how it becomes. So thank you. It is the thing that true healing happens when you're honest, pure honest with yourself. So thank you for sharing your honesty with people. So
No, it's my pleasure.
yeah. So thank you. And have you done any inner child work, inner child healing?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think if you'd have asked me a number of years ago, like whether I had any healing to do, I probably would have been like, no, my childhood was very normal, in quotes. And what I've learned through this work, both with myself and with clients, is we don't always recognize trauma as trauma. And sometimes that's because of the sort of negative connotations of the word. And sometimes that's because as humans, and I think particularly women, we have a tendency to downplay how much of an impact things really have on us. But yeah, what I really can see now through my own journey, and sometimes I think it was Steve Jobs that said, you can only join the dots in hindsight. And I feel like that's definitely the case for me in terms of the inner child work that I've done. I can see that I've healed from a lot of trauma. So I give you a little bit of background on some of the stuff that's happened, that happened in my past. So my parents separated and divorced when I was 7. And for me, it came completely out of the blue. I was utterly blindsided by it. And honestly, it's only really fairly recently that I realized how much, like recently in the last few years, maybe, that I realized how much that really affected me, even though that's nearly 40 years ago now, revealing my age slightly. But I went to bed like one evening, that little me, thinking that I was kind of safe and that life was as normal. And my life was just turned on its head. Like the next day, I was living in a house with a man I didn't know, without my brother, without my dad, without our dog. And I'm a massive animal person, so that was a big thing for me. And the way that I found out that that was happening was my mum came into my bedroom and pretty, when I was in bed on an early evening, I was only little, and pretty much said, I'm leaving and you can come if you want, or you can stay. And I was 7. And I want to be really clear, I'm not blaming my mum for anything. She was young and hoping the best that she could. And yeah, the inner child work that I've done has brought compassion to my mum and has massively transformed our relationship as a result, because I'm sure you can appreciate that it was tricky. But growing up, and you can probably see why, I wasn't close to my dad. And we didn't develop a strong bond probably until I was in my 20s. But my dad and my brother were very close. And that resulted in that little me just believing that I wasn't good enough, believing that I wasn't worthy of, in general, but probably of the love of my dad, which I think can be so common with siblings and parents and things. And my brother is the sort of person who was just good at things. He was smart and he was confident. And of course, I was his little sister. So I compared myself to him, and he was almost 3 years older than me. So I spent a long time believing that I wasn't as good or as clever as him. But of course, I can see now I was just younger. I was always 3, and still am 3 years younger than him. But I felt like he was so much better than me because I'd spent, my life trying to kind of play catch up. And, unless I have a time machine, I never am going to be able to catch up. And of course, now I'm grateful I don't need to be the eldest. But as a result of those feelings of not being worthy, I acted out in anger, and which was normal when you think about the background of how unsettled I was with my family separating, the fact that I was blindsided. But I was told I was difficult because I was angry. And again, no blame to my mum. She was having a tough enough time herself. I think, and I hope, that parents today are probably a lot more aware of what's behind a child's behavior. Not everybody, but I think there's much more awareness, thank goodness, through podcasts like this and other things. But 40 years ago, it wasn't the case. I was kind of told that I was bad and I was wrong. And what I can really see is that really impacted how I felt about myself for a long time, because what I can see for that little version of me, I was just trying to navigate life. I was angry and scared and hurt. And it came across as being kind of difficult to my family, but I was what I didn't know at the time, I was asking to be held. And so my mum started a new relationship with somebody when I was maybe 9 or 10. And he was really patient and really kind. And he understood me in a way that no one else had seemed to. And I reckon probably for the first time, I felt seen and heard. And that was life-changing. And it wasn't the end of the story, sadly. He was quite troubled as a person, and he was quite a lot older than my mum. And with the benefit of hindsight and with the work that I do now, I can see that he'd had a lot of trauma. And very sadly, he committed suicide when I was 12, which was, I was going to say it was tough, but honestly, I don't think I processed it because I was 12, which is still very young. And obviously there was all of the background. And so I think partly where my own healing happened was through recognizing the impact that had on me, but also in relation to what had happened previously, where I'd kind of finally found somebody that understood me and was patient and kind. And then he was gone. And it was hard for a long time, because in addition to that, my mum had spent a long time being quite sad, and he'd made her happy. And so things when he was around were on quite a nice equilibrium for the most part. It was the relationship was a little bit volatile in terms of other stuff, which we don't need to go into, but it was kind of, it felt like we'd almost kind of anchored for a little while, and then we were back out at sea again. And again, I feel huge compassion for that little version of me now, because I can only imagine how challenging it was. And so as a result of all of those things that I've shared, I've like I said, I felt angry, probably because I was confused and scared, and I felt like no one cared about me, and I felt like I was wrong. And how that manifested was, as an adult, I became hypervigilant. So like I tried to control everything to make sure that nothing bad happened. And I honestly think that I became so successful in my career so young, relatively. I just kept climbing the ladder, even though I didn't think that I was ambitious, and I kind of surprised myself. But it felt like I was driven by a force that was beyond me. And what I now know through all the work that I've done is that it was my subconscious mind trying to prove that I was good enough, that I was worthy, and trying to achieve worth and status to kind of show the world that I mattered. And I think that it was also a way of trying to garner some control around my own life, because it had been so unstable from when I was so young. It was almost like, well, I'm going to do this on my own, because if I've only got me to rely on, then I'm going to do it my way, and nobody can take it away from me. And what happened, and when we obviously made the decision to go to France, and I'll give you the background as to what the trigger for that was. I think I was close to burnout, because obviously I was trying to fill the void of not being worthy and not mattering through status and success in my career, but they were never true. So I could have had the job of president of the world, but it wouldn't have been enough, because you can't disprove something that's not true in the first place. So what it led to, all of that, was I was ignoring my own needs, really. I was doing the things that I thought I should do, in quotes, to be successful. But what I thought success, in quotes, was, didn't make me happy, because I still had the belief that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't worthy. And so life, as it often does, intervenes just when you need it to, even if we don't always see it that way at the time. I was offered the director level position, the HR human resources director level position, and I turned it down. And thank goodness, like literally when I got offered it, we'd already bought the house in France, and we had our plan to kind of escape, and I got offered the job. And it was, you know how when your intuition speaks, you feel it in your body. It was like my body went, no, it couldn't, like, and I turned it down, because I was so close to burning out at the role I was doing, which was the level below, that my body and my mind were like, no more. It's a no from me. No, 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 no. And that was the start of me changing my life. I knew that I couldn't carry on like this. I couldn't have told you then all the things that I've just shared with you now about where it was all coming from, and the drive that came much later, while I was giving myself the space. But something deep within me was like, you cannot carry on like this. You're like 32 or 3. And I was done. I was just like, I was deeply unhappy. I was deeply unhealthy. And thank goodness my body and mind clicked into true survival mode, honestly. And yeah, that was the start of everything changing.
Thank you so much for sharing your vulnerability and honesty. I had chills and I'm speechless. So thank you so much. I really hope many can listen to this, and your honesty and your vulnerability will help so many. So thank you, really. All there.
Thank you for listening. It's so nice to have such a safe space to share. But I agree that I think there's a lot of people that have things that have happened to them, you know, sort of, you could argue, worse, and yet we still as humans have a tendency to pretend it's not that bad, and that's what blocks the ability to heal and grow. And for me, it's transformed my life, and if my story can help others, then of course I'm very happy to share.
Thank you so much. And do you have any advice for someone new in this journey?
Yeah, so the biggest piece of advice that I would say is have a look at your relationship with yourself. Like, how do you really feel about you? Because most people, in my experience of myself and clients, have a pretty low opinion of themselves. And until you heal that, you won't truly grow, because you'll sabotage yourself at every turn. And so I see that with clients often. Like, healing your relationship with yourself is so pivotal, because how we feel about ourselves is the foundation of how we treat ourselves. So when I talked about and kind of chuckling away about my day and my like amazing OCD system of Tupperware boxes and freezer books, I do that because it's my commitment to myself to eat food that nourishes me, that makes me feel good. But when I was in the reality, or not even reality, but when I believed that I didn't have time, in quotes, in my old life, in my corporate life, yes, it would have been challenging to do it, but it wasn't impossible. But I was so far away from recognizing that I mattered that it wasn't the door was closed. I didn't even think it was possible. So now it's about how can I find the way to do the things that make me feel good. And so getting clear on how you feel about yourself and why, in my view, really helps you to start to see what created those opinions, like I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, I don't matter. And until you can see them, it's not possible to transcend them. And one of the things that I've learned about myself, and particularly through supporting clients, is this really big myth, which is that you have to be hard on yourself to be successful, and that you have to berate yourself if you don't meet your exacting standards. So I still do have takeaway, for example, and I do still eat chocolate, and I do have the things that people might categorize as bad, but they're in the minority, and I don't berate myself for doing it. For me, it's about when you understand what's happening underneath in the mind, you get to be disciplined about how you live your life, but that doesn't mean that you're harsh on yourself. You're doing it from a place of genuine love, because if you reflect back on my story, there was a lot in there where what I actually needed was love, and again, no blame, but I didn't get it. What I got was judgment. And that leads you to start to judge yourself. So really kind of looking at that relationship with yourself, because for me, it's about being accountable. So my actions support what it is that I say that I want. But if things don't go to plan, which, life happens, it's the nature of it, you can support yourself to pick yourself up and carry on, and not berate, judge, and undermine yourself because you hit a blip. And that's the big difference about that balance between holding yourself to a high standard, but not using it as a stick to beat yourself with, doing it because you love yourself and you recognize that it's within your gift to feel good. So, and I think probably the final thing, the reason why I think healing our past is so crucial is because what I see is so many people actually living in their past without even realizing it. And my own story a lot, why I was driven into my corporate career. When I said I didn't even think I was that ambitious, I was driven by something outside of me. It obviously wasn't outside of me, it was within me, but it felt like it because I was unaware. So many people, of which I was one, are carrying things around with them from years ago that they're still upset about and often still defined by. So if somebody's been cheated on, they take it on as their own fault, for example, rather than thinking, oh, well, maybe the relationship wasn't right. Maybe that person doesn't have the level of integrity that I thought they had. They make it about them. And that happens when you don't have a robust and resilient relationship with yourself. So for me, it starts and ends with us. Once we've healed, we can have a great relationship with ourselves. And that's the precursor to creating a great life, in my view.
Thank you so much, Nicky. I feel so honored to have you, and everything you have said, and you have just put your whole soul on display. So thank you so much. Thank you. I really wish to have you on board again. Anytime you can book it again if you want. I would love to have you here again. So thank you for this time.
It's my absolute honor, Azadeh. Thank you so much. I love the platform. I love what you stand for and everything that you're creating. And if I can be a small part in helping that, then it's my absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And I'll see you soon.
Yeah.